Hello and welcome to Cooperative Vermont. We're coming to you live from VCAM Studios in Burlington, Vermont this Sunday, October 20th, 2013. I'm Matthew Cropp. Eric Davis is off for the day. And I've got a really interesting show this evening. We've got Neily Jennings of the Common Ground Center, who will be discussing both her involvement in the broader cooperative movement and the work that the Common Ground Center is doing. And so that'll be a little bit later on, but first the news. Probably the biggest event is last Tuesday. An event a group of us had been working on putting together a co-op event for New Economy Week that I felt like went off pretty well. So we got a bunch of video. And keep your eyes on the show, and in a future episode we'll be showing some of the footage. But essentially, we had a delegation of cooperators come up from Mexico, who are part of the FAT, which is a federation of co-ops, unions, and community organizations. And they did some presentations on the various sectors and work that they've been doing in their movement in Mexico. And we also at this event had an announcement of the formation of a new worker co-op alliance in Vermont that is going to be sort of mirroring some of the work in southern Vermont and Massachusetts and western Massachusetts that's being done by VAWC, the Valley Alliance of Worker Co-ops. So a number of worker co-ops had members present at the event and gave a little overview of the work that they do, including WebSkillet, PT360, data systems, Catamount Solar, and Digger's Mirth. Yes, Digger's Mirth, the collective farm. But they sort of announced that this project, which will be both coordinating amongst the worker co-ops and also sort of promoting new worker co-ops. So that's going to be a project we're definitely going to be watching. Another piece of news that's on the radar is food co-op elections. City Market has its election period is coming to a close. Today's the 20th. I believe the last day to vote is the 21st. So if you haven't cast your ballot, head over to citymarket.coop to do that. And also, I've heard that I believe Hunger Mountain Co-op's elections are going on. So if you're a member of that co-op, another one to get involved with. Now, the Keep BT Local project, whose goal is to create which has created a co-op that is aiming to buy the Burlington Telecom from the city of Burlington, has been continuing to do outreach towards the goal of having about 1,000 members by the time the court decision between the city of Burlington and city capital comes down. This weekend was Tech Jam, so Keep BT Local had a table as part of Tech Jam that went on Friday and Saturday. I participated for 2 hours on Friday, and a number of volunteers showed up and did some outreach and signed up some new members, handed out yard signs. So that campaign is continuing apace. And finally, the International Credit Union Day, which happens every year in October. This year fell on Thursday the 17th, and there was a number of co-ops both on social media and also sort of in their branches did some events to kind of promote and celebrate the day. So if you're a member of a credit union, and good on you. If you're not a member yet, get on moving that money. So we've got a couple of other events coming up specifically around credit unions. Bank Transfer Day is the 5th of November. So if you have any friends who have yet to join the movement of cooperative finance, you should nudge them to get their money moved over before or on the 5th of November. So that about wraps up the co-op news. I believe there should be some, we might actually be doing a co-op happy hour on the 5th of November as well. So check out the Cooperative Vermont Facebook page or our website, which is coopvt.wordpress.com. There's a calendar link, and you can check that out there. Now we'll be moving on to the interview with Neily Jennings. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Neily does a whole bunch of stuff for the Common Ground Center, including sort of administrative side of things, financial side of things, really a jack of all trades type. But before we get into the work that you do there, do you want to give us a little bit of background about your involvement in the co-op movement?
Sure. I came to co-ops when I was in my early 20s. I moved into a community-owned house. It was a co-op, and through that got involved in a federation of student and community-owned housing cooperatives, so spanning U.S. and Canada. And I ended up working there as the director of education for 4 years. So my job was to go around and visit member co-ops, organize annual education and training events, and generally support the development and maintenance of housing co-ops. And it was largely a youth-run organization, so the constituency was mostly between the ages of 18 and 25, but there's lots of people who are outside of that range too.
So was it how did you first get involved in the housing co-op thing? Was it you just kind of fell into living there, or did you have
I did an AmeriCorps year and was looking for affordable housing. So I've moved into a house with 20 other people, and we had all kinds of systems for managing the co-op together. Everyone had to do 4 hours of labor a week, so some people might be cooking meals, some people might be doing grocery shopping, some people might be paying the bills, and it really was a lesson in how a group of people can make decisions and manage a house and maintain a decent-sized property together. That co-op was part of a larger system of, I believe, 8 cooperatively owned houses. So there was kind of a system of mutual support amongst those co-ops, and then those co-ops were a member of the larger organization, which is called the North American Students of Cooperation, or NASCO. So there were several tiers of ways to get involved and learn about the process. And I think a lot of people who were members of those co-ops went on to be involved in other types of democratic workplaces and or at least be members of different types of co-ops and credit unions. So it really did serve as a starting off point for a lot of people.
And then, so you lived in this housing co-op, and then you worked for was it NASCO?
Yeah.
For 4 years, and then so what once that was finished, what was the next step for you?
Well, throughout the time I was working for NASCO, I was also educating myself about different co-op sectors. So I got a little bit more involved in the worker co-op sector and ended up organizing a conference for democratic workplaces in the eastern half of the U.S. So, and I've continued to serve on the board of that organization. So it's called the Eastern Conference for Workplace Democracy, and it happens every other year somewhere on the eastern half of the U.S. And that's been a really educational experience for me too, to learn what people are struggling with in workplaces and how those differ from housing co-ops, and what are some of the challenges to the movement as a whole. So yeah,
that sounds like sort of a broad by design kind of umbrella workplace democracy. Do you want to unpack sort of a little bit what are the different sorts of organizations and groups that come together at this conference?
Yeah, so there's employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs, that come. There's worker-owned cooperatives. There's people who are interested in developing new co-ops and different models for doing that. There's nonprofits that are interested in organizing themselves democratically. I've met all kinds of people at these conferences, and then within all those types of groups, there's many different sectors. So we have domestic workers who are organizing their own co-ops. We have people doing data and technology that are organizing co-ops. We have rural-based co-ops, urban-based co-ops, everything in between. So it's really designed for people to connect across regions, across sectors, and often coming out of that conference, there's continued work and cooperation among the people who connect there. So yeah, it's been a really interesting group of people to be involved in.
And how many years has that been going on?
I believe I got involved in 2011, but I believe it was founded in 2005. I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure, but it's been going on for quite a while, and it's related in a way to the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, which holds the national conference in the years when the Eastern Conference isn't happening. And so the West Coast has their own conference at the same time as at the same years as the Eastern Conference, and then the national one convenes in between. So, yeah. So there's kind of a back and forth that happens there.
And so in addition to that, sort of how does that relate to your work with the Common Ground Center? Is the Common Ground Center sort of something that attempts to sort of have workplace democracy as part of its mission, or?
Yeah, I actually got involved in Common Ground Center because I met one of the co-founders at a cooperative conference. Actually, I met both of them at a cooperative conference. They've always been very interested in cooperative models and democratic ways of doing things, and sort of getting the community to take ownership of the project. So that's how I got involved, and that's kind of been my role there, is to help support the creation of systems and structures that encourage ownership and democracy.
So let's talk a little bit about Common Ground Center. Like, what is the project? What's the background of the of the organization and
well, it was founded in 1994, so we're now approaching our 20th year, which is exciting. And it was founded initially as a family camp. So the idea was to create a summer camp experience for the whole family, and what made it different from other kind of vacation options was that there was a sense of community that people found there. Families kind of all merged into each other. Like, the kids end up hanging out with other kids from other families, and parents keep an eye on all the kids together. And there's also a sharing of skills that happens. So if someone wants to teach watercolors at camp, they can offer to do that, and people can learn that. Or if someone wants to lead a nature hike, they can do that. So the idea is to sort of create a space for people to share and connect in a different way than they would on a normal vacation or in everyday life. And there's also always been an attempt to have people take on some of the work and put some sweat equity into it. So people do community service jobs. They might have to, they might sweep the dining hall after meals, or they might, help in the kitchen, or some people like to brew tea before meals and things like that. Like a little tasks that people can do to make the work easier. So that was how it originally started, and it was founded as Camp Common Ground, and it was renting another campground. So in 2006, Common Ground Center started operating on a full year-round site in Starksboro, Vermont, which is about 40 minutes south of Burlington. And the idea there was to be able to develop a broader mission and have a retreat center and a space for building community, and some agriculture projects and all kinds of ways for people to connect on and with the land. So it's really been developing into much more than family camp since then.
And so the community of people who kind of grew up around the family camp, is that sort of would you say kind of like the core, the sort of like, did they form kind of the core driving force as to the agenda of the mission of the Common Ground Center, or kind of what are the things that really sort of feed into that sense of purpose and direction?
Yeah, The people who attended family camp were the original core community, and a lot of them continue to be. There's people that have been coming for all 20 years, so that's kind of cool. There was a sort of a committee of people that helped select the site, and then people came for the first few summers that Common Ground Center was there. They came and helped build the cabins, and the teenagers got to paint the doors of the cabins. Like, everyone had a role in developing it. If someone was a carpenter, they got to really kind of lead the carpentry team, and if you weren't a carpenter, you got to learn how to be one. So that was kind of the development of the site, which now has 20 cabins and a lodge with 8 guest rooms, and then a bunch of other meeting spaces and facilities and stuff. So it's really been a huge community project just to have a space. And then in terms of the direction, it's kind of evolved from a lot of different places. It's partially the vision of our founders. It's partially who came to us. So we've had lots of groups that have rented the site in the past couple of years, and it's kind of what they bring to it. Like, if someone wants to do a yoga retreat, then it becomes a yoga retreat space. If someone wants to do a folk music camp, then that's what it becomes. So there's been that kind of involvement in directing who we're becoming, and we're still trying to figure that out. We're still trying to define who we are.
So you talked a little bit about how earlier about kind of what part of your role is really in the governance, or like kind of helping sort of define that kind of that governance side of things.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of what the governance of the Common Ground Center is, like who feeds into that, like how it works all along those lines?
Yeah. So we have 5 of us that are kind of in the core of the management, and 3 of us are year-round staff. And 2 of us are the co-founders, and they donate all their time, which is pretty amazing. So the 5 of us are the major decision-making body in terms of operations. We are also, since we're a nonprofit, we've always had a board of directors, so they steer the vision and the direction of the organization in a lot of ways, and they also they're responsible for ultimate financial and personnel kind of decisions. So, and then there's a lot of part-time and seasonal staff that come through that are involved in a lot in helping with the vision, but they're not necessarily in all those major decisions that are made by the 5 of us. So, so the structure of how we work, it's still evolving, but we have a system where we call them hubs, that are responsible for different areas of what we do at Common Ground. So there's a marketing hub, there's a site rental hub, there's a program hub, there's governance, finance, site management, and I think there's a couple others, but those are the basic ones. And each of those hubs usually has 2 people on it. And so there's like a number 1 person and a number 2 person on each hub. And the number 1 person is kind of like the bottom liner, or the person who's really responsible for that area. And then the number 2 person can be consulted as often as needed, and it depends. For each hub, it's a little different. Sometimes people are working, talking to each other and making decisions together every day, and sometimes it's just like you have a big meeting to set the plan for the year, and then a lot of autonomous work happens. So each hub is responsible for bringing things to the whole staff that are staff level decisions, and then those things can be brought to the board if they're board level decisions. So in a lot of ways, it eliminates the need to have a meeting about everything. It's a lot easier. Like, I'm part of the marketing hub, so it's a lot easier if I can say, I'm sending out my monthly newsletter, like, hey, number 2 person, can you look at this and give me some feedback? And we don't necessarily have to spend everyone's time, but I can always ask anyone else for their feedback too if I need it. So it's been an interesting system to experiment with. Yeah, it works pretty well. Yeah.
So for kind of bringing in, you have the sense of that there is this kind of larger community of people who have a vested interest, stakeholders who have a vested interest in the project beyond that core group. So again, you mentioned the family camp thing. Like, kind of what's the way that they at all involved in the governance or the kind of charting the course?
Yeah. So we are we're a nonprofit and we have members, and the membership has been defined in different ways in the past, but right now it's basically if you show up for an annual meeting, you're a member. So anyone can kind of get involved in that way. So the annual meeting happens every fall, and it's a chance to make some of the bigger decisions we need to make. We have to run by the membership, and other ones it's just like we might be getting input on whether we should start a new program or add more weeks of family camp or things like that, where people are really invested in how we do that kind of thing. But I think we also incorporate our community input in other ways. Even though, like, a lot of people are only coming to our site for a week, but even so, there's a lot of investment that people put into it in that week that they're there, and sometimes people end up coming back as staff or spending more time with us. So, for example, like, we had a couple board members at one point who I'm not sure if they were both members of the board at the time, but they were very involved in the organization, and they really thought we should have a gift shop. So the sort of board gave them their blessing to do that, and they really took it and made it their own. They designed homemade T-shirts. They made little kits of arts and crafts supplies that people could buy based on what they had participated in at camp, and they ran it. They had their own little accounting system and all this stuff, and it's that type of thing where it was a lot better, more robust than it might have been if it had been a side project for one of the staff members to deal with. So that kind of thing happens pretty frequently. We have our brick oven for baking pizza because of someone who was really interested in building something on our site, and we were like, well, we've been thinking about doing this, and they drew up the plans and they built it and they made it happen, and it's been used a million times since then. So it's those types of ways where people can take some ownership, and then they want to come back and see,
person who built that every time someone uses
and
it.
even there's even little smaller things, like we have a bathhouse where people shower and stuff like that, and we have tiles on the wall that were painted by campers, so people can be brushing their teeth and say, oh, that's me from 2004. Oh my gosh. So it's those kinds of things kind of create a sense of community.
So another question I have is, you mentioned that you kind of came into this role after having learned about it, the Common Ground Center at a Co-op conference, and actually my first awareness of it also came from a Co-op conference. What's the connection there? Why? What's the connection between the Common Ground Center and the cooperative movement? Why have we had these mirrored experiences?
I think it has a lot to do with our co-founder, Jim Mendel. He's always been a huge advocate for co-ops, and he had a similar introduction to the cooperative movement. He lived in a student housing co-op when he was in school. So I think there's always been a sense that the cooperative model is somehow a good fit for Common Ground Center, and this interest in having the community really take ownership of it has been sort of driving that. But yeah, I mean, we're not a cooperative, and we have talked about it. We have thought about like whether we could be a consumer co-op, and it's not something we've ruled out or anything. But I think there's definitely an affinity with that model, more so than our identity as a nonprofit. We identify as a cooperatively run or democratically run space. So, yeah.
Because it definitely seems, we've had folks from two different recreational co-ops. There's Mad River Glen, which is the ski area that has that is a fully functioning sort of cooperative, and then there's the Whalum Park, which is in Massachusetts, which is an attempt to kind of revive an old amusement park that after being closed, sort of many generations had gone there, and there was a deep sense of community attachment to the space, and the idea of a co-op as being a way of sort of mobilizing that community attachment into reviving it. Yeah. But it seems like the from what I'm hearing is that you have that kind of very similar thing. You have this community of people who value a space in like an intergenerational way.
Yes.
And the Common Ground Center seems to be sort of a mechanism for sort of preserving and promoting and improving that space over time. But sort of have you guys kind of worked with any or connected with any sort of like other co-ops from other sectors, like outside of the kind of, I guess, I don't know if you call it recreational or sort of the places that are sort of holding that community space, but sort of the food co-op sector or credit union sector or other worker co-ops? Or is that something that you're interested in doing?
It's definitely something we're interested in doing. One thing we've thought of doing is having a cross-sector youth co-op camp, which is a model we've seen in Ontario that we really like, where young people would come and learn about co-ops and also sort of help operate the camp for the week that they're there as a co-op. So we thought about doing that. We've also thought about an idea where we would host like an annual meeting weekend for different co-ops and organizations. So we could provide a space and lodging and make the annual meeting sort of idea be more of a festival and like a reason for people to come out and want to participate. So we thought about maybe there could be like several different organizations hosting their annual meeting on the same weekend at Common Ground or something. It's those types of ideas are always kind of circulating around. We have also connected with a cooperative retreat center in Michigan, the Circle Pine Center. So just to kind of get exchange ideas about how to involve different organizations and co-ops and stuff. They host a lot of cooperative retreats and meetings and events and stuff, and part of their mission is to promote the development of new co-ops and the movement building kind of activities. So
what's the background of that? I've never heard of that until you mentioned it today.
Circle Pine Center, I'm not sure about their whole history, but I know it's a cooperatively owned retreat center. They have a bunch of members, and they have a lot of member participation in the development of programming. So like a lot of the programs that they run there come from the co-op members. So, yeah. So.
Because it seems like that idea of actually like the co-op movement having almost like a designated space for those sorts of activities. Because something that like when I have gone to, say, co-op conferences or things, it's always kind of, there's a co-op thing happening, but very rarely is it happening kind of really in a space that you have a sense of like this is a co-op movement space. There are very few of those in Vermont. It's like, okay, well, last like cooperative summit, I rent out a hotel or something like that.
And we would love to host more cooperative events. We've talked a little bit with the Vermont Employee Ownership Center about hosting their conference. It's a little challenging because we are a seasonal space in some ways. We have a year-round lodge that can hold up to 50 people, but from like May to October is really the time when we can host a lot of people. So if that timing doesn't work, it doesn't always work. But yeah, we definitely talk on a regular basis with co-op people, and it's been really inspiring to see the work of Cooperative Vermont and this new alliance that's forming, bringing people together, because I feel like there's more and more a need for a space, and I know that they're going to need to have a retreat at some point. So we'd love to talk to them and host it, and talk about how we can support that kind of work. Yeah.
And so in your role, you're kind of balancing this, your work with the Common Ground Center with kind of working on the Eastern Conference on Workplace Democracy. Kind of what are sort of for both of those hats that you have? What are the sort of next steps or things that you see kind of coming up in the future? Well, I mean, with ECWD. I think we're always kind of talking about like, okay, we have this conference and that's what we do together, but what's the next step? So I think we've always talked about sort of how can we push the movement further? How can we help support the development of co-ops? And maybe there's like a smaller retreat that could happen in between conferences that's more focused on a specific project or something like that. The youth piece has been a big one, the possibility of building that. And if we did some kind of youth program, it would definitely be in partnership with ECWD and other co-op support organizations. So there's definitely some overlap that happens. We've also thought about, could there be a family camp week for cooperative movement people? Could there be a cooperative themed week or something like that? Because it would be, in some ways you can really create a cooperative culture, in this little microcosm for a week. So there's ideas going around. One thing I'd like to hear a little bit more about, you mentioned, is the idea for the kind of youth camp that's based on. You said that there's already sort of something like this in Ontario. Yeah. So what are the details on that? Like how does it work? Who sponsors it?
Yeah. Well, what I know about it is that they get different credit unions and co-ops to each sponsor one participant, and so they have sponsors that are credit unions, dairy co-ops, cooperative associations, and food co-ops, I'm sure, and then the youth come together, and I think they spend a week. I think they have different age groups that they do programming for. And part of the program is going and visiting co-ops and talking to and having people talk about their experience and how their career path has led them to co-ops. I think there's a sort of missing link somewhere where people thinking about a career don't necessarily think about a career in co-ops. And for the most part, if you go to business school, you're not necessarily going to learn about that style of management or that model for organizing a business. So starting that early and getting people thinking about that and thinking about how they can use it in their everyday lives would help promote that, I think. And I think there's a lot to think about in that type of work.
So like when you think about this, I don't know if you know the details about their example, but like in terms of where the participants would come from, would the idea be, a credit union steps forward and says, okay, we're going to be sponsoring one student, and then that particular student comes from the credit union's membership, or or would it be that the co-ops just sort of sponsor a student generically, and then the program takes applications from the whole community?
I think that it would be more like applications from the whole community. There might be a way in which they'd like their applicant or their person they're sponsoring to be connected in some way. Maybe it would be like the region that they're serving. They want, if it was City Market, they might want someone from the greater Burlington area to be able to attend. And I'm not really sure. It's something that we'd have to think about. So. Yeah,
because it's one of those things where, and I think this speaks to that kind of gap that you sort of identified. But that when people do talk about co-ops, it tends to be kind of from a very sort of, in terms of like thinking about the model, tends to be kind of from a very sort of high level of discourse, I guess. And so it's interesting to think about how do you sort of translate that kind of thinking about how organizations are structured, rather than when I was a kid, pretty much, when you're a kid, for the most part, you assume that the institutions you encounter are what the world is. You don't necessarily think critically from an early age about, this is structured a little different from that. So like kind of thinking about how do you translate that sort of those ideas to maybe high schoolers or even middle schoolers, kind of like where they're at in terms of education.
Yeah. Well, the ideas that I've thought about are like to have high school students start their own micro business and teach them how to do it in a cooperative way. So maybe they're the yearbook committee or something. Like they're already going to be doing a yearbook. They're already going to be charging people money for it. It is kind of like a mini business endeavor. So maybe you could have it structured in a democratic way and get people involved in selecting photos and and having meetings and have it facilitate in a way that a cooperative would do it, maybe there could be a movie theater that's organized democratically, because a lot of people work at movie theaters as high schoolers, and wouldn't it be cool if they ran the business? Like couldn't they? Like I feel like if you give young people that kind of responsibility, they'll take it. Like you just have to provide some support and guidance. So one of the models I'm always impressed by is the Toxic Soil Busters Cooperative in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's a group of young people that, from what I understand, they started to get upset that their neighborhood was full of all this lead paint and toxic soil, and they weren't happy with that, so they started this business where they did soil testing and soil remediation, and they have a group of adults or older people around them supporting them, but they really are driving the force, and it's really amazing to see the innovative ways they promote themselves, and they think outside the box because they've never had a box to think in. They've never been taught that you need to do your marketing a certain way, or you need to run your business in this particular way. So it's a lot easier to build these habits of democratic management when there's not already this ingrained idea of how a business should be run.
Yeah, it seems like that idea of it really being a hands-on thing rather than, being theory heavy and here's a bunch of readings about how co-ops work, but actually sort of experiencing, creating opportunities to experience firsthand for young people, like the way, like the difference, or kind of like what that feels like and what the challenges are and stuff like that.
And I think introducing them also to role models that because a lot of people when they're young, the careers they're thinking about are the adults around them, and so if you have people interacting with them a lot that are leaders in the cooperative sector, they're going to think about that a lot more. So, yeah.
And I think another organization that has been doing a lot of really good work, sort of maybe like that's another link in that chain, is I think COFED. I don't know if you've been following them, but they do the stands for I think Cooperative Food Empowerment Directive, but really pushing for student-run food co-ops on college campuses.
Right.
And sort of that similar thing, but like kind of one step further along in the developmental process, but giving college students, just like you and a lot of the people you lived with, the experience of being in a housing co-op was very formative, and sort of having those similar opportunities for saying, okay, like, say, like, rather than having Sodexo running the campus store, you have students running that. And
when I was working for NASCO, we actually had a few members that ran student businesses on college campuses, and I went to a few of their meetings, and I was really impressed by how professional they were. I mean, they weren't wearing suits and ties, but they sure were like having effective meetings and getting things done and looking at financial reports together, and I think that's really like that is going to inspire them a lot more than listening to a lecture. It's like actually this is a job and you're making money. So, yeah.
I think that really is one of the keys in this whole question of how does the next generation of cooperators get cultivated, is it's the appeal of the cooperative movement is it's both idealistic and practical at the same time. I think you can have idealism, you're working towards these goals, but at the same time it's something that it is a job. It can actually put food on the table.
And I think that cooperatives are most effective when there is a financial need. It works a lot better if everyone has this shared common goal of like, guess what? Like, none of us can afford to own this business on our own, but like together we can do this and we can thrive and we can have like really great livelihoods and really great family life. And I think that goes a lot further than a political ideal, and in fact it brings people across political beliefs together if that financial piece is there. So it's interesting because there are different spectrums of reasons for why people start co-ops or get involved in a co-op, and it looks a little different depending on what the reasons are. Yeah.
No, I mean, one other kind of example of that, sort of having one of those formative experiences, is Andy Jones, who works down at the Intervale Community Farm, was talking about how he went to Oberlin College, and they have small, in their dorms, the college was talking about consolidating all these like small dining halls that they had in each dorm into sort of bigger ones, but they didn't really have the resources to do that.
Right.
So they essentially allowed the students in some of the dorms to take them over and form basically these cooperative dining halls. And kind of his involvement in that and sourcing local food was what kind of put him on the path that ultimately led him to, being a farmer for a consumer co-op farm in the Intervale.
Those university experiences can be really impactful, and the more they grow, the more impactful they are. I know when I was working for NASCO, I remember the Berkeley Student Co-ops, which is, I think, 20 properties and over 2,000 members, they had just developed a system for collecting compost across all the co-ops. And so they were branching beyond housing. They were dealing with waste management and, all these things. And so they would collect the compost, and then they'd have a site where they would keep it moving, and then it could get distributed back as soil for gardens, and the city adopted that system. So now the whole city has a compost pickup system, and like every so often the city is can go and get compost back, and so it's really amazing to see how like a bunch of students who people might have thought they were wacky for picking up each other's food waste, really were like entrepreneurs and made that happen, and I think a lot of those people have gone on to be involved in cooperatives like in an ongoing basis. So, and it's not just, I think the goal is not always just to have people working for a co-op. Like that's a great, I would love for all of our economic endeavors to be cooperatively run, but it's also great for people to understand why it's a good idea to join a credit union instead of a bank, or to join a food cooperative instead of just shopping at your big box grocery store, or I'm part of a food buying club in my town. There's like 6 or 7 households, but it's great. It's very convenient for us to order dry goods once a month to supplement what a lot of people grow in their gardens. So things like that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an important point in that, if we're thinking about that big question of how do you kind of cultivate that next generation of cooperators, some will go whole hog, but for, it's important to have a more broad-based appreciation for the cooperative model and to be able to apply it to wherever, whatever at whatever level that you can. So, not you need both people to be working for them, but also people who are willing to serve on the boards. But maybe they make their living in doing something else, but still value it enough to say, okay, or even not just participating in governance.
Yeah.
And that's that question of how do you reach beyond the sort of layer of like real sort of zealots and say, all right, like how do you build this kind of broad-based support?
Yeah.
And some co-ops do a great job of it. Some sort of have let it really atrophy, and it's kind of interesting to see that as like a larger project of, to a certain extent, some co-ops kind of take ownership of like building that cooperative culture, but the larger question of how do you build a culture of cooperation that transcends individual institutions, and people start thinking of it as a movement.
Right. Yeah. I know it's been interesting. Like I've worked with a bunch of different boards of directors, and I notice people who have been involved in co-ops in the past or have learned, how to facilitate a meeting. That is like such an important skill, and it's just fun. It's interesting to see how people who haven't necessarily had that experience when they're younger, like sometimes I assume people know what I mean when I go like this or something, because it was a process we used in other meetings I've had, and everyone understood it. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I can bring something to this meeting that might help us all communicate because I've had that experience. So. That
actually brings up a really important piece of the question of, okay, so young people getting involved. And something that I've thought about a bit in terms of meetings is the question of like almost democratic literacy. And in some ways, like in our societies, there's this sense of like, civics, and you learn how democracy works. But for the most part, with some exceptions, I think Vermont's a little, and northern New England is an exception to the rule in the United States, but for the most part, democracy has tended to mean, going and voting at the ballot box.
Mm-hmm.
Here, like in northern New England, we have town meetings still, so that there are places in civic life to actually experience face-to-face democracy.
Yeah.
But I think that there's that when we were talking about that earlier, but it occurs to me that really sort of building that baseline of skills seems to be like an incredibly important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I think you can't have a democratic process if people don't have a shared understanding of how decisions get made, and
you walk into an annual meeting, and the people who know the process will dominate the process.
Exactly,
over the people who don't.
It's a way of consolidating power. I think when a smaller group of people understand how they can be a leader or how they can get their voice heard, and other people that are affected by the organization or the business don't understand that, so then they're disempowered. So yeah, that's a really that democratic literacy idea is a really important one, and I think that's where the education and training piece comes in with practicing democracy. You need both, and when I was on the NASCO, when I was organizing the NASCO board of directors, it was largely a group of people who were on their first board of directors or had only, most of them had attended meetings with their within their own housing co-ops, but we did a board training every single meeting because it was like there was a constant need to educate the members about how they could take ownership of this organization. So, I think that's really important.
Just those, an example that kind of comes up for me of sort of was at the Vermont Federal annual meeting last year, where there was this whole big debate, the kind of controversy that happened, and then ultimately kind of you had one of the members of management kind of kept going on the topic after the vote happened, and that there's someone who an older gentleman in the back who stood up and was just like knew the process enough to be like, this is out of order, we need to move on to the next item on the agenda, this is how it works.
Right.
But for the most part, people who didn't have that baseline of experience would just sort of let the people who are kind of seen as at the top of the hierarchy do whatever they're going to do, versus sort of understanding enough to know that, okay, even though I'm just one member in the room, I have the right to assert myself.
Right.
And sort of having that confidence is, without that confidence, you can have all the sort of theoretical democratic structures you want, but you're still going to have the same kind of problems of hierarchies, sort of entrenched hierarchies developing.
Yeah, and I think organizational culture goes hand in hand with that. Like that person who kept on talking after the decision was made, does that mean he didn't buy into the decision? And why didn't he buy into the decision? Like, did he not, that I think you need to create a culture of people feeling comfortable speaking up when the time to speak up is happening. And to go back to Common Ground Center's process a little bit, we build things into our meeting structure to make sure that doesn't happen, and it still does. But you can diminish the effect of people maybe not buying into decisions by one thing we do is we limit the number of big discussion topics to 2 per meeting, or decision items. So it would be easy for us to come up with an agenda with 6 items to talk about, but you would get to a point where people would be fatigued by the meeting, and they just thumbs up every decision just to get out of the meeting, and that's not buy-in. That's just whoever is willing to talk the longest wins, and that I think that can be one of the pitfalls of consensus decision making is. If everyone's not invested in the process and knowing how it works, then it's not going to be an effective decision making, and you're going to process, and you're going to find yourself 2 weeks later coming back to that decision, and someone's going to bring up more concerns, and you're going to be it's not going to work if you're not understanding all the pros and cons of a decision when you make it. Mm-hmm. Another thing we always do is at the beginning of every meeting we have personal check-ins, and this is something I kind of insist on in every meeting I have, because it's just a way for people to share what's going on with them personally, so that so that if someone acts a certain way or does a certain thing during a meeting, you can be like, oh yeah, like their dog just died last week. Maybe they're upset. Like maybe I should take this emotional response to what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Or it gives you a chance to celebrate people's accomplishments too. So I think that's a really important mechanism for building trust and being able to make effective decisions together. So having a meeting structure is that everyone understands, and knowing how decisions are made is like one of the key things to having democracy work.
So I think we're just about out of time, but it seems like there's a lot of kind of exciting and interesting things coming out of this, these projects that you're working on, Common Ground Center, Eastern Conference. Mm-hmm. So if people want to learn more and get involved, what are kind of like the best ways for them to do that?
Well, you can contact me directly. You can email me at Neily, Neily, at cgcvt.org. Or you can find out more about Common Ground Center on our website. Just search for us online and we'll pop up. And same thing with Eastern Conference for Workplace Democracy and NASCO. All those groups have Facebook pages too, so if you're on Facebook, check that out. So.
And are there any upcoming events that people should be aware of, either for
any of those? NASCO has an annual conference in November. Not sure the dates, but it's coming up, so if you're interested, that'll be in Michigan. And Common Ground Center has an annual meeting on November 3rd. So that's a great way to find out more about us and get involved.
And that's open to the public, or?
Yep, it's open to the public. And we'll be doing our board elections at that meeting. So that's a great way to find out more about us. Oh, we also have a 20th anniversary celebration in the spring. It'll be Mother's Day weekend next spring, so that's going to be a really big, exciting event to come out for. So
nice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come down to Burlington. And,
thanks for having me.
Chat up co-ops.
Yeah, it's fun.
So you've been watching Cooperative Vermont. We do this every 2 weeks from VCAM Studios in Burlington on Channel 15, and we also throw the episodes up on YouTube, so you can look for us on Cooperative Vermont's YouTube channel, and we've got a Facebook page, a website. So we tend to have a fair amount of news in the meantime. But until the next episode, I'm Matthew Cropp. Good night.